Good afternoon. We begin a new series of programs in Medyascope with collaboration of Istanbul Policy Center, Sabancı University, and Stiftung Mercator Initiative. We will focus on this series of programs on the position of Turkey in international order and in European order in particular. So today we have two guests, Professor Senem Aydın Düzgit and Professor Frank Schmelfenig. Thank you very much for your joining us today. And we talk about today differentiated integration and EU-Turkey relations. But first, before we discuss on differentiated integration and EU-Turkey relations, Professor Düzgit, could you please explain what this initiative is and what kind of events, programs, scholarships does it organize, and so on?
Okay. Well, let me first say a few things about the Istanbul Policy Center, of course, for those who might not be familiar with the institution. The Istanbul Policy Center is a part of Sabancı University that works more on policy-oriented research, focusing on certain thematic areas. Including but not limited to conflict resolution, Turkish foreign policy, Turkey's relations with the European Union and Europe in particular, and climate change, urbanization are some of the topics that we deal with. And an important part of IPC work is in conjunction with the Mercator Foundation in Germany, in Essen, where we have the IPC Mercator initiative. This is an initiative that has been in place for more than 7 years now. And under the initiative, the initiative funds various research projects in these different research clusters that I've just mentioned. So you have conflict, you have climate change, you have urbanization, you have foreign policy. And within and under the umbrella of the initiative, we also have IPC Mercator Fellowship Program, where we have a fellowship program for junior fellows who are mostly people who have just completed their PhD or young scholars or researchers, but they don't necessarily have to be academics or postdocs. Sometimes journalists or artists, etc., are also funded within the scheme depending on their project, which lasts for 1 year. So every year we recruit IPC Mercator fellows working in one of those thematic areas. But we also have the IPC Mercator Senior Fellowship Initiative, and which we're very happy to have Professor Frank Schmelfenig from ETH Zurich with us as a part of the Senior Fellowship Program, where we have senior and distinguished fellows from Europe, but also from the United States, to come and spend a certain amount of time at the IPC, doing their research or attending their meetings and talking about their current projects or research interests, etc., to the crowd, to the academics, policymakers, think tank community, etc., within Turkey. And that's more or less how we function.
Okay. By the way, I forgot to introduce my guests. I'm so sorry. Senem Aydın Düzgit is a senior scholar and research and academic affairs coordinator at the Istanbul Policy Center and also professor of international relations at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences of Sabancı University. And Professor Frank Schmelfenig is currently a Mercator IPC visiting senior fellow. And professor of European politics and a member of the Center for Comparative and International Studies at Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And now I would like to begin with the hottest topic actually, which is called Brexit. So after Brexit, how do you see the future of the European Union? Such a failure or a continuing story?
Well, I mean, the fact that Brexit happened is, of course, a failure. It's the major, probably even the only instance of disintegration in the European Union that has happened so far. So it is a turning point in the history of European integration, because the assumption was that European integration only knows one direction, which is forward, upward. And Brexit reminds us that history has different directions, and so it is really a turning point in that development. It is, however, not the first step towards the disintegration of the European Union. I think it is a singular event to some extent. We do not see any other member states following the United Kingdom out of the European Union. And of course, if history can be reversed, it means, well, maybe a generation from now, yeah, a different United Kingdom might want to apply to join again.
And the same question is also for you, Professor Dizgit. Do you agree with
Yes, I largely agree with Professor Schimmelpfennig. I think it's important that it hasn't been followed, or basically it hasn't been taken as a precedence for the other states, for the other member states. And furthermore, I think the whole process, which was very prolonged and which was very crisis-ridden, in fact, in my opinion, serves as a kind of a disincentive for any country that has watched that happen and then has watched and seen that torturous process unfold. And I don't think they would be very willing for the same process to happen to them. It has been very polarizing, it has been very problematic, it has been dragged on, and I think it demonstrated as well that it's very difficult for you to negotiate as a single country against the whole European Union. So in terms of, showing the dynamics of the process as well, it is perhaps even a discouraging element for the other countries to follow suit.
Considering Turkey, what could you say? Is it a positive or negative thing, Brexit, I mean, for Turkey?
Well, both. In the sense that, negative, that I wouldn't say it negative, but difficult in the sense that now Turkey has to, and Britain of course, has to formulate its own policies with Turkey, be it in trade or other matters that was subject to the EU policy framework so far. So for Turkey, of course, that is also a challenge, considering the fact it also has a customs union agreement with the EU, etc. So that's a challenge. I wouldn't say negative, but a challenge to deal with. But a negative in the sense that, Britain was an EU member state that was always, often in favor of EU's enlargement to Turkey. Even though recently enlargement is mostly off the agenda, it was still much more favorable towards, EU's relationship with Turkey and its wider neighborhood. So in a way, it has lost that kind of heavyweight in the European Union that has played an important role in the past in pushing for Turkey's accession negotiations. So that can be taken as perhaps a negative development.
Okay, now we can talk about the main topic of this program, differentiated integration. You have a book which will be published in February, I think, with Thomas Winson, which has titled Ever Looser Union, Differentiated European Integration. Actually, what is differentiated integration? Can you elaborate this?
Yes, of course. Well, it's probably good to start with the opposite, which is uniform integration. And that means all member states and member states only are integrated to the same degree in the same way as every other member state. Yeah? So differentiated integration means that there's variation in the depth of integration of individual countries. And that applies both to member states. Yeah? So not all member states integrate to the same extent in all policy areas as the other member states, but it can also mean non-member states selectively participate in EU policies without becoming an institutional member of the European Union.
But in perception, this concept could be, it's my point of view, it could be perceived as an insulting thing, because the candidate countries like Turkey, for example, thinks that it has to be a full member of the European Union. The other option or options are something lower or insulting or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this could be one perception, and I think differentiated integration is is open to various meanings and usages. So let me make 2 points here. One is there are, of course, states that see differentiated integration as an opportunity and as a chance. Yeah? So imagine a European Union which only had 2 options. Yeah? Either you're a full member or you're not a member at all. What that would mean is that, okay, if you want to join European integration, be a member, you have to subscribe to everything, even if you don't like it. Yeah? So, I mean, from the point of view of Denmark or the UK in the past, having differentiated integration was actually something they liked, yeah, because it offered them a choice. Yeah? And it also gives the member states or states in Europe in general the opportunity to choose from the menu of integration the degree of integration that they like and that their people want. Now, of course, for those, these are those countries that actually would like to have less European integration than the majority of the member states. Of course, you're referring to those countries that would like full integration but are blocked from full integration by the European Union. But even for these countries, I think differentiated integration is an opportunity because it offers them a range of partial integration in a situation where the alternative would be no integration at all. So that would mean Turkey without a customs union and a number of other cooperation agreements that it might have with the European Union.
What are the types of the differentiated integration? In your book, you mentioned instrumental differentiation, constitutional differentiation, and so on. So can you?
Yeah, so I mean, we've already talked about this external and internal differentiation, member states, non-member states. You also have different types or modes of differentiated integration. So there's the famous multiple speed integration, which means that some countries move ahead, others follow. There's also the idea of a core Europe, where you have a group of member states that is fully integrated, and you have other states that do not wish to or are blocked from being fully integrated, which are a bit of the concentric circles around this core. And there's also the idea, well, you have different Europes, yeah, and countries participate in these different Europes, let's say an economic Europe, a defense Europe, yeah, to varying extents. So, I mean, the meaning is actually quite open. What now you refer to when you speak about instrumental and constitutional differentiation is 2 logics of differentiated integration that have driven differentiation in the European Union for the past decades. So when we speak about instrumental differentiation, what we mean is mainly the differentiation of new member states. So when new member states enter the European Union, it is rare that they become full members from day one of their membership. Yeah? But there are some exemptions, there are some transitional arrangements, so they do not fully participate in all European policies from day one. But this is as I said, a transitory stage. Yeah? So after a few years, they usually become full members if they want to. Yeah? And the constitutional differentiation, this is really about what kind of European constitution you want. Yeah? Do you want the European Union to be a deep internal market, yeah? Or do you want the European Union to also move into areas of core state powers like fiscal policy, welfare state policies, internal and external security policies? This has been a major divide among the member states and has been one driver of differentiation among the member states.
Professor Düzgit, how do you find this new approach? Can I say new approach?
Well, it's been around for a while. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, what do you think about this differentiated integration?
Yeah, let me start by referring to your question about because what you were referring to was whether this can be read as some kind of privileged partnership, which has always been taken as a bit of an insult to injury in the Turkish psyche. And I think it's important to clarify that these two things are not the same thing. What is understood as privileged partnership in the Turkish context is something, a mode of relationship that is offered by the EU instead of membership, where Turkey has the minimal amount of voice, basically, in that relationship. And I think when people think of it as such, it reinforces their feeling of inequality and this feeling of being dominated by Europe, etc. But differentiated integration is not exactly the same thing as privileged partnership. I think conceptually we need to distinguish between the two, because differentiated integration in a way is a mode of being for Europe right now. It's kind of an ontological issue in terms of how EU shapes itself both inside and outside. So it's not like a specific policy that is imposed on specific states. It's the mode of being that results as a result of an interaction between the European Union and within its member states, but also between the European Union and different countries in its wider neighborhood, in the north and the south and the east. So those two things are different. And when you take it as such, then the next point to make, and a related point to make, is that membership and differentiated integration are not mutually exclusive phenomena, right? If I'm not mistaken. So you can have the membership option there and still be engaged with EU in various different institutional arrangements and cooperation or customs union or what have you, and be a part of that differentiated integration model. So in that way, it doesn't cancel out, it doesn't rule out indefinitely the membership perspective for any country that can be, in principle, considered European.
I think it was very important to emphasize the difference between privileged partnership and differentiated integration, because I also thought in the beginning, what's the difference between differentiated integration and privileged partnership? And thank you very much for this. And I would like to...
sorry, let me just say something as well. Sorry. And another thing is that, since I'm familiar with the Turkish context as well, privileged partnership has a very sort of negative connotation because it is seen as a specific policy that is only designed with Turkey, whereas differentiated integration covers all the countries in the EU's wider neighborhood. So it's geographically is a very wide region. So once you're a part of that differentiated network, you're just one country among many others who are associated with the EU under different contractual arrangements. I think that also distinguishes it from what we perceive as privileged partnership in the Turkish mind.
Another issue, what is the problem in enlargement of the EU to the Balkan countries? This contradiction between France and Germany, or France and the rest of Europe, I don't know. And what is the problem, and how can differentiated integration work in this case?
Well, so here we are really in the context of enlargement, which is, as Senem said, something we should distinguish from differentiated integration. So what's the problem? So EU enlargement since the early 1990s has been based on some kind of a deal. So the EU tells European non-member countries, you reform, you become democratic, you become rule of law states, you modernize your economies, you modernize your administrations, you improve governance, that covers everything. In return, the more you improve governance, the closer you get to membership. And differentiated integration in this context means, there are different steps towards membership. So we might start with a trade agreement or partnership and cooperation agreement, then comes an association agreement. This can be upgraded, then you become a candidate for membership, then you start negotiations. And the deal always has been, the more you approach the standard of governance that the European Union sets, the closer you move towards this towards the full membership stage. And everything in between is differentiated integration. So countries in the enlargement process are already able to participate in some policies, get some rights with regard to the European Union, but not the full set of membership rights. Now, the difficulty in the Western Balkans, but I don't think this is just a Western Balkans issue, is that this deal has become shaky, and has suffered from, let's say, from lack of certainty on both sides. Mm-hmm. So from the EU side, the EU perceives the Western Balkan countries to relent, to stall in their democratization process. We've seen some democratic backsliding in the Western Balkans. We've seen setbacks to rule of law reforms in these countries. On the other hand, we've seen negative public opinion in the European Union on Western Balkans enlargement. We've seen some member states dragging their feet, undermining their commitment to the European Union. And I think to some extent both processes feed on each other, because you only reform if you think that this will lead to membership, whereas the EU will only give membership if it is confident that these countries institutionalize these reforms. And also the experience of Bulgaria and Romania, where the EU thought after they joined, well, they weren't really ready yet, or we see the problems in many Central and Eastern European countries now. Both processes interact and basically undermine each other, and this is the basic issue. Now the French-German difference here is that France has taken the point of view, well, we need to reform this entire process because it's not working. We need to find a new enlargement strategy. Well, whether this is sincere or not is a matter of debate. It also has to do with, let's say, a long-standing reluctance of France towards Eastern enlargement, which we've already seen in the 1990s. Whereas for Germany, the idea is, well, it's a gradual process, and even if the countries don't meet all the conditions now, it's still good to give them the chance to move them ahead in this process. And of course, the concrete issue was North Macedonia, where Northern Macedonia, after a period of democratic backsliding, went back to liberal reform, also solved the name issue with Greece by moving from the Republic of Macedonia to Northern Macedonia. Most of the EU member states thought, okay, this needs to be rewarded, because it sends a bad signal if you put conditions, countries meet the conditions, and then still they do not advance towards membership. So most of the members thought that this should be rewarded by the start of accession negotiations, whereas France and a few other countries blocked this. But I think this is, let's say, the front line, the observable front line. But there are structural issues in this enlargement process that, let's say, neither the German nor the French position can solve. Which is the reduction of, let's say, confidence in this entire process, and the reduction in confidence in the quid pro quo. You reform, we admit you.
The time is running, so let's talk about Turkey. Okay. Is it all over in terms of EU-Turkey relations, or what are the major problems?
Well, I mean, it can never be all over, even if both sides want it to be all over. There are major issues which tie the two sides together, which means that there will always be some kind of contractual relationship, and Turkey will be, a part of that differentiated integration zone, one way or another. If you look at the European Union, it's the number one trading partner of Turkey, of course, so there is an economic issue. EU member states are the number one foreign direct investment providers in Turkey. And plus, of course, there's a migration issue which connects the two. There's the fight against terrorism, etc., etc. So there are various key issue areas in which both sides have to look eye to eye. So that is why, even if they do want it to be over, it's very difficult for them not to. But on the other hand, the enlargement question is a different question. And of course, enlargement side, things seem to be frozen for the time being. Of course, on paper, contractually speaking, Turkey is still an accession country, a candidate country that's conducting accession negotiations with the EU. But we know that accession negotiations are currently at a stalemate, so there are no chapters opened, no chapters can be closed anyway. So there's a dead end that's been reached there.
Dead end. Okay,
yes, for now.
So my impression is you are not a little bit, but pessimistic.
Well, I mean, in terms of membership in the short to medium term, my personal hunch is that is a pessimistic one, of course. And that's not just because of the way in which today's Turkey is governed, and its governance problems are, of course, mounting. That's another story. But also the fact that, as Frank has rightly discussed, that there is also a very negative mood in the European Union regarding enlargement. And even towards Western Balkans. And when you put Turkey in the picture, of course, I guess the negative mood would be even more compounded. So when you put the two together, I don't think there are grounds to be very optimistic in the foreseeable future in terms of membership. But again, that doesn't mean that both sides cannot find workable ways of dealing with one another.
How do you see the future of the EU-Turkey relations?
Yeah, well, I think Senem described the current situation correctly. I think in the foreseeable future, enlargement is not the way to go, and that has to do with the situation on both sides. But geography doesn't go away, interdependence doesn't go away, so we have to think creatively about alternative options. And here, differentiated integration comes in again. Yeah? So I think both sides have a lot of common interests, or at least common problems, and these are best dealt with in a cooperative manner. And you can basically go through the entire list of policy issues, and you will always find, okay, there's something that the EU and Turkey need to talk about. Now, one of the problems here is that this mutual cooperation is so much fraught with the membership issue, that I see the danger that fruitful cooperation does not happen, because the membership question always gets in the way. So from the EU side, the thinking always is, okay, if we cooperate with Turkey on this issue, doesn't that interfere with the enlargement process and the non-opened negotiating chapters? From the Turkish side, the perception is, well, if they offer us cooperation on these specific issues, is that not membership minus? Doesn't that mean they want to give us some kind of consolation prize? So I think there needs to be some fresh thinking in terms of seeing cooperation chances without always having the big membership issue in the back. So I think here is an opportunity to explore cooperation, policy specific, where you find common rules to deal with the interdependent issues between the two sides, and hopefully set the membership issue, the enlargement issue, aside for some time. I'm sure it's going to come back. Things change, things move, but for the moment, it would be really useful if both sides looked at the issues rather than the big membership issue.
We are always talking on EU-Turkey relations, but there are also other dimensions. For example, what about Turkey-NATO relations? And can Turkey get out of NATO, or is it realistic?
No, I don't think it's realistic to expect Turkey be getting out of NATO through its own will, and I don't think there are any mechanisms for the other countries to chuck Turkey out of NATO as well. So I think NATO will remain as is, with the already existing divides within it. So the divide isn't just between Turkey and some other member states of NATO, but also within and across other NATO member states as well, like US and some European powers, etc. So yes, NATO is, I think, going through problematic years and period. Also, of course, thanks to the Trump administration's position on NATO, and which creates question marks as to how committed this administration is to the transatlantic alliance and to the future and a strengthened NATO. But I don't think it will go, basically along the road where it will lead to NATO's demise, and that I don't see realistic, again, in the foreseeable future.
Professor Schimafini, how would you see the if there is common security and defense policy of the European Union, considering the relations with the US and with Russia, of course?
Well, of course, the common security and defense policy has always been the least integrated policy area of the European Union. And there was not really any strong demand or necessity to develop that policy dimension further, because there was NATO. It would be very hard for the European Union to replicate the capacities of NATO and what NATO could do for their defense. So as long as NATO functions, at least half well, there will not be much enthusiasm in the European Union to strengthen its own defense cooperation. And there are many member states, especially those that are closer to Russia, that would not want to rely on a European guarantee as long as the American guarantee looks somewhat stable. Now, of course, I think there are some developments. There are developments that we see in terms of defense cooperation, not in the hard military terms, but in terms of economic defense procurement cooperation. We've seen some moves in that direction, because if you look at European defense policy, you see a lot of duplication, and it's highly inefficient to have so many small member states all having their own little weapon systems, having their own little defense industry. So there is an economic driver here. And of course, the rest also depends on what happens outside the European Union. First of all, how strong the Russian threat is being perceived. But I think the more important dimension is what is going to happen in the transatlantic relationship. Europe, I mean, so far I think there's been more smoke than fire. I think the defense cooperation on the ground works, but assume another Trump term, assume an anti-NATO policy on the US side, then Europe might be forced to do something that it really doesn't want to.
Another question, do you see Russia as a closed threat or danger for especially eastern borders of the European Union?
Well, I mean, it's a big challenge, I think, of course. I mean, if you have Russia acting as an assertive actor in the wider neighborhood, which it has been doing for some time now, and plus Russia has the capacity to act as a singular actor, as opposed to the European Union, as Frank was saying, does not have a unified European, at least a solid, unified and coherent foreign security and defense policy. It has to rely on NATO, and plus, of course, the individual capabilities of the member states. But there, of course, you have different threat perceptions. The threat perception differs from one EU member state to the other when it concerns Russia. Of course, if you're from a Baltic country, you tend to have naturally, right, more intense threat perceptions about Russia and its intentions. Whereas if you're a, southern member state, drastically the threat perception might decrease. I mean, for me, the Russian threat is somewhere, or the challenge is somewhere in the middle. Not perhaps invading, Estonia tomorrow, but also not a distant actor that's there just minding its own business. So it's somewhere in the middle. It is an important actor in the sense that not only it's geopolitically very assertive in the eastern neighborhood, but also now in the southern neighborhood, of course, through Syria, through Libya. So it's not just the east that Europe should be concerned about. We see it most recently in the Libyan case, for instance, and the divisions between France and Turkey and Russia, etc. So it's becoming a major issue. And also Russia is an issue concerning the domestic politics of some of the EU member states as well. For instance, there are speculations and claims about how it has played a role, let's say in the Brexit referendum and other elections and, funding populists, etc. I mean, I think we still have to be careful not to over-exaggerate maybe the influence of Russia in European domestic politics, but it's definitely playing a different game there, and I think we need to acknowledge it.
There are so many questions and issues to discuss, but our time is limited and we have another program after this program, so we have to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you
and thank you very much for watching. See you next time.